Hello guys, how are you? Today I bring you another topic of great importance. Alright, let me ask you a question. If you had an idea that seemed completely crazy, an idea that forced you to leave a stable job, risk your future, and move to the other side of the country, would you do it? Most people answer no. And that's exactly where the most common mistake people make when they look at success stories appears. They believe great entrepreneurs had a brilliant idea from the very beginning. They believe everything was planned. They believe they could see the future. But reality is completely different. And the story of Amazon is probably one of the best examples of this. Because Amazon did not begin as a company that wanted to sell everything. It did not begin thinking about cloud computing. It did not begin wanting to revolutionize global logistics. It did not even begin with the goal of becoming one of the most valuable companies in history. Everything started with something much simpler. A man looking at a statistic and asking himself whether he was ignoring the biggest opportunity of his life. That man was Jeff Bezos. And to understand Amazon, we first have to understand who he was. Because the company did not appear out of nowhere. It was the result of years of learning, mistakes, curiosity, and a very particular obsession with the future. Jeff Bezos was born in 1964. From a very young age, he showed a characteristic that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He was extremely curious. He liked taking things apart, understanding how they worked, solving problems, and thinking in systems. He wasn't simply intelligent. He was the kind of person who constantly asked why things worked the way they did. As he grew older, he developed a huge interest in technology and science. And that led him to study electrical engineering and computer science at Princeton. Interestingly, after graduating, he didn't immediately become an entrepreneur. Did you know that a single statistic can change an entire life? Because that's exactly what happened. In the early 1990s, Jeff Bezos was working at a financial firm on Wall Street. He had a prestigious job, a good salary, great career prospects. In theory, he was living the professional dream that many people desire. But then he came across one piece of information that completely caught his attention. The internet was growing at a rate of nearly 2,300% per year. And when he saw that number, something happened in his mind. He couldn't ignore it. He began thinking that if the internet was growing that fast, then new ways of doing business would surely appear. New industries. New opportunities. And then he made a decision that seemed absurd to many people. He quit. Yes. He walked away from a promising career to pursue an opportunity that almost nobody understood. And here we find one of the most important lessons in this story. The biggest changes usually look ridiculous at the beginning. Because if everyone already believed something would work, the opportunity would probably have already disappeared. Jeff began analyzing which products could be sold online. He made lists, comparisons, research, and finally, he found something that seemed perfect. Books. Why books? Because there were millions of different titles. No physical bookstore could possibly store them all. But the internet could display an almost unlimited catalog. It was a simple idea. Now imagine this scene. Jeff Bezos and his wife driving toward Seattle. As they traveled, he was writing business plans, running calculations, and dreaming about a company that didn't yet exist. That already tells us something important. Amazon wasn't born inside a huge corporate building. It was born inside an idea, and shortly afterward, inside a garage. Yes. The classic story we've heard so many times really happened. Amazon's first days were surprisingly modest. There were very few people, very few resources, a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and an enormous amount of work. The company was named Amazon because Bezos wanted a name associated with something enormous. And few places are bigger than the Amazon River. It also started with the letter A, something very useful in an era when directories listed websites alphabetically. They're small details, but they reveal how he thought. Always seeing advantages where others saw ordinary details. In 1995, Amazon officially launched its website. And then something incredible happened. Orders started coming in. People from different places were buying books without ever visiting a physical bookstore. Today that seems normal. But back then it was revolutionary. Most people didn't even trust entering their credit card information online. Everything was new. Everything was uncertain. And do you know what the next mistake people made was? Thinking Amazon was just a bookstore. Because Bezos was already thinking much further ahead. From the very beginning, he had a different vision. He didn't want to build the best bookstore in the world. He wanted to build the world's most customer-centric store. And that difference changed absolutely everything. When a company focuses only on selling products, it thinks one way. But when it becomes obsessed with solving customer problems, it begins finding opportunities everywhere. That's why Amazon started expanding. First books, then music, then movies, then electronics, then practically everything imaginable. And while all this was happening, the internet was also growing. More and more people were getting connected. More and more consumers were losing their fear of shopping online. And Amazon was ready to take advantage of that trend. But here's the thing. It wasn't all success. For many years, the company lost enormous amounts of money. Many people believed it was doomed to fail. Critics said it would never become profitable. Investors had doubts. The media questioned the strategy. Yet Bezos remained focused on one very specific thing: the long term. An idea we've also mentioned when talking about investing. Thinking in years, not weeks. Thinking in decades. Now comes a part that very few people know. Because most people think Amazon became a giant simply by selling products. But that's only part of the story. The real transformation happened when the company began building infrastructure. Distribution centers, logistics systems, technology, software, processes. Everything designed to deliver products faster and faster. And that's where a huge advantage appeared. While other businesses saw the internet as just another tool, Amazon started building an entire ecosystem. Every logistics improvement allowed it to sell more. Every increase in sales justified new investments. And those investments made the company even stronger. It became a cycle that fed itself. Little by little, Amazon stopped being just a website. It became a gigantic logistics machine, one of the most efficient on the planet, and that allowed it to do something many competitors couldn't: scale. Grow rapidly without losing too much efficiency. But the story was still far from over, because Bezos' next big move seemed even stranger than selling books online. Imagine you have an e-commerce company. Everything seems to be going well, and suddenly you decide to enter a completely different industry. That's exactly what happened. Amazon had developed enormous technological capabilities to run its internal systems: servers, storage, processing power, digital infrastructure. And then one question appeared: what if other companies needed this too? That's how Amazon Web Services was born, or AWS. And this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Because today, many people believe Amazon makes its money mainly from selling products. But a huge part of its financial power actually comes from AWS, technology services used by companies all around the world. Websites, applications, digital platforms. Thousands upon thousands of businesses depend on AWS infrastructure. And that demonstrates something very interesting. Amazon never stopped evolving. It never stopped experimenting. It never stopped searching for new opportunities. That ability to adapt eventually became one of its greatest strengths. Do you want to know what the real secret behind Amazon was? Because it wasn't the internet. It wasn't technology. It wasn't luck. The real secret was an obsession with solving long-term problems. And this is important, because many people look at successful companies and try to copy the results. But they forget to copy the processes. They forget to copy the mindset. They forget to copy the patience. Amazon spent years building advantages that weren't obvious to most people. Advantages that seemed boring. Logistics, storage, infrastructure, processes. But those were precisely the areas that created enormous barriers for competitors. And here's another interesting lesson. Many times, the greatest opportunities aren't where everyone else is looking. Many times, they're found in places that seem much less exciting. And Bezos understood that better than almost anyone else. By the way, if you enjoy these business stories, I recommend watching our video about the history of Wall Street. Because many of the ideas that drove Amazon have their roots in decades of financial and business evolution. As the years went by, Amazon continued expanding. New services arrived. New products. New acquisitions. New markets. The company began influencing entire industries. E-commerce, cloud computing, entertainment, logistics, digital advertising, and many more. What's impressive isn't only the size it reached. What's impressive is the speed at which it kept transforming itself. Because every time it seemed to have reached its final form, it reinvented itself once again. And that's something very few organizations manage to do. Most companies find one successful formula and hold on to it. Amazon did something different. It kept changing. It kept experimenting. It kept betting on the future, even when many of those bets seemed risky. And that's exactly where we find one of Bezos' most important characteristics. He wasn't obsessed with protecting the present. He was obsessed with building the future. Now, let's return to the mistake we mentioned at the beginning. Most people believe business success comes from having one perfect idea. But Amazon's story proves something completely different. The first idea is rarely the final version. Businesses evolve. Companies evolve. People evolve. Amazon started by selling books. Today, it's one of the most influential companies on the planet. And between those 2 points, there were thousands of decisions, thousands of experiments, thousands of problems, thousands of adjustments. That's why when someone only looks at the final result, they miss the most important part of the journey: the building process, the adaptation, the ability to change when circumstances change. And perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of this entire story. You don't need to know every detail about the future. You simply need to be willing to adapt when the future arrives. So the next time you open Amazon, remember something. You're not simply looking at an online store. You're looking at the result of a decision made decades ago by someone who saw a statistic and decided to act. Someone who left security behind to pursue a possibility. Someone who understood that the world was changing and wanted to be part of that change. And even though not all of us will build a billion-dollar company, we can still learn something from this story. We can learn the importance of thinking long-term, the importance of adapting, and the importance of not confusing an initial idea with a final destination. If you enjoyed the story, I also recommend watching our video about the history of Wall Street and our content about how some of the world's greatest economic forces were born. Because when you understand how these companies came into existence, you also understand much better how today's world works. And believe me, behind many giant companies, there's always a much more human story than it first appears. A story of doubt, of risk, of difficult decisions, and above all, of people trying to build something that had never existed before. And that's exactly why the story of Amazon remains so fascinating even today.